Hey everyone, welcome back. I hope you're all having an amazing day. Before we dive into today's stories, I need your help with something important. There's a channel out there trying to impersonate our community. If you're on a computer, you can help by heading to their YouTube page, clicking on the About section, and selecting Report User. I've pinned the link to this channel in the comments below. Thanks so much for your support. Let's get into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. It was early 2023 when my trusty old TV finally gave up the ghost. I decided to treat myself to one of those fancy new smart TVs everyone was raving about. A month or so later, I had an epiphany. Nobody in my family was watching regular TV channels anymore. We'd all fallen into the streaming rabbit hole. "Hey Sarah," I called out to my wife one evening. "Do you think we should keep paying for cable?" She looked up from her tablet, eyebrows raised. "When was the last time you even touched the remote?" I chuckled. Point taken. Cutting the cord wasn't as simple as I'd hoped, though. My TV service was bundled with my phone and internet plan, some special package with its own dedicated support team. It took a solid week of back-and-forth calls before I finally got a solution. "Mr. Johnson," the representative said, "we can convert your TV connection to prepaid. Then you can simply stop recharging it." "Sounds good to me," I replied, relieved to finally have an answer. For the next few weeks, my phone buzzed with recharge reminders. Then came the message to return the set-top box. I promptly replied, and within days, a technician swung by to collect it. I thought that was the end of it. Boy, was I wrong. The calls started pouring in from various call centers, all pushing me to recharge. It felt off, nothing like dealing with the usual support team. A quick internet search revealed this was now standard practice in my area. The company had outsourced this part of their operation to a third party, who were working from an outdated printed database. "I'm sorry, but I've already disconnected my service," I explained for what felt like the 100th time. The caller remained unfazed. "Sir, our records show your account is due for recharge." I tried everything to get through to them, but it was like talking to a brick wall. So, I switched tactics. I started spinning tales about my non-existent TV troubles. "Oh, you know," I'd say, feigning frustration. "I've been having the worst time with my set-top box. I've called support so many times, but no one seems to be able to fix it." I even started recording the calls. The third time I tried this approach, it finally got some traction. "I understand, sir," the caller said, sounding concerned. "I'll book a technician right away." Within hours, I got a call from a field technician named Mike. When he showed up at my door, I greeted him with a cold drink and explained the real situation. Mike burst out laughing. "That's a good one. You know what? Keep it up. Maybe they'll finally get the message." Over the next couple of months, I had 8 different technicians show up at my door. Each time I'd explain the situation and we'd share a good laugh over it. Finally, I got a call from a supervisor, Tom. He sounded exasperated. "Mr. Johnson, why do you keep booking tech support when you don't even have an active connection?" I couldn't help but chuckle. "Well, Tom, I've been trying to tell your team that for weeks. I'll email you the call recordings if you'd like." Tom was less than amused, but the flood of calls finally slowed to a trickle. These days, I might get a call once every few weeks. When I do, I dust off my trusty script about my troublesome TV. If they take the bait and try to book a technician, I know they'll soon see a note on my account. "Do not bother this gentleman." It's not the most conventional way to deal with persistent telemarketers, but hey, sometimes you've got to get creative. The next one is an entitled people's story. I never thought I'd be at war with my neighbors over a swimming pool, but here I am. My name's Mike, and I've lived in Sunny Pines subdivision for about 5 years now. It's a nice enough place, quiet streets, well-kept lawns, the whole suburban dream. When I bought my house, I was thrilled to find out it came with an in-ground pool. Living in Florida, having your own private oasis is a godsend during those sweltering summer months. For the first few years, everything was great. I'd come home from work, take a refreshing dip, and relax with a cold beer while floating on my pool noodle. Sometimes I'd invite a few friends over for barbecues and pool parties on weekends. It was my own little slice of paradise. That all changed when Karen moved in next door about a year ago. From day one, she made it clear she was going to be a pain in the ass. Within a week of moving in, she'd already filed 3 noise complaints against me for having music on at 7 p.m. on a Saturday. I tried to be a good neighbor and keep things down, but it seemed like nothing I did was good enough for her. Things really went off the rails when Karen somehow got herself elected as president of our homeowners association. I'd never paid much attention to homeowner association stuff before, I just paid my dues and kept my lawn mowed. But once Karen took over, she started implementing all kinds of crazy new rules. No parking on the street overnight, no leaving garbage cans out past 6 p.m. on pickup day. You needed written approval to paint your front door. It was getting ridiculous. I mostly tried to keep my head down and stay out of her way, but then came the day I got home from work to find a group of strangers splashing around in my backyard pool. "What the hell is going on here?" I yelled as I stormed into my own backyard. A woman I didn't recognize looked up at me with a confused expression. "Oh, hello there. We're just enjoying the new community pool. Aren't you excited about the new amenity?" "Community pool? This is my private property," I sputtered. "Oh no, dear. Didn't you get the notice? The homeowner association voted to declare all private pools as shared community assets. It's wonderful, isn't it? Now everyone can enjoy a refreshing swim." I was dumbfounded. How could this possibly be legal? I never agreed to any of this. I politely but firmly asked everyone to leave my property immediately. As they were gathering their things, Karen herself came waltzing through my back gate like she owned the place. "Is there a problem here, Mike?" she asked in that sickly sweet voice of hers. "You're damn right there's a problem," I growled. "What gives you the right to declare my private property as community property?" Karen's smile never wavered. "Now, Mike, as president of the homeowner association, it's my duty to look out for the good of the whole community. And the board decided that private pools were an underutilized resource. By opening them up to all residents, we're increasing property values and community engagement. Isn't that wonderful?" "No, it's not wonderful. It's trespassing and theft." I never agreed to this. "Actually, you did," Karen said smugly, pulling out a thick binder. "It's all right here in the homeowner association bylaws you agreed to when you bought your home. Section 8, paragraph 12, clearly states that the homeowner association board has the right to designate private amenities for community use if approved by a majority vote." I was speechless. How would I miss something like that in the fine print? "This isn't over," I warned as I went inside to call my lawyer. Unfortunately, my lawyer confirmed that the homeowner association did technically have the authority to do this based on the bylaws. He advised that my best bet was to fight it through proper homeowner association channels or try to get the rule changed. In the meantime, I was stuck with strangers using my pool whenever they felt like it. It only got worse from there. Karen started scheduling official homeowner association pool parties and swim meets in my backyard. I'd come home to find dozens of people crowded around my pool, leaving trash everywhere and tracking water through my house to use the bathroom. My water and electric bills skyrocketed from all the extra pool use and pump runtime. I tried reasoning with Karen, explaining how this was negatively impacting me, but she just brushed off my concerns. "Think of all the joy you're bringing to the community, Mike. You should be proud to contribute like this." I was at my wit's end. I couldn't use my own pool anymore without feeling like I was intruding on someone else's party. My peace and privacy were completely gone. Something had to give. That's when I came up with a plan. I started attending every homeowner association meeting, carefully documenting all of Karen's little power trips and rule violations. I made nice with some of the other homeowners who were also fed up with her regime, and I bided my time. My opportunity came about 2 months later. Karen had scheduled yet another swim meet in my backyard for the neighborhood kids. As usual, she didn't bother to ask my permission or even give me a heads up. I just came home to find a swarm of children and parents taking over my property. I calmly walked out to the pool area where Karen was holding court like the queen bee she thought she was. "Ah, Mike," she said when she spotted me. "So glad you could join us. Isn't this just delightful?" "Oh, it's delightful, all right," I said with a grin. "In fact, I think it calls for a celebration. Who wants ice cream?" The kids all cheered as I went inside, presumably to get treats. Instead, I grabbed my phone and dialed cop. "Yes, hello. I'd like to report trespassing and unauthorized use of my pool. There are multiple unsupervised children swimming without my permission or proper safety measures in place." I could hear the sirens approaching as I walked back outside, still smiling. Karen's face dropped as she realized what was happening. "Mike, what did you do?" she hissed. "Oh, I'm just looking out for the safety of the community," I said innocently. "After all, isn't that what the homeowner association is all about?" The next few minutes were chaos as police and paramedics arrived. Parents scrambled to grab their kids and belongings. Karen was apoplectic, screeching about homeowner association rules and community property. But the cops weren't having any of it. "Ma'am, this is a private residence. Unless you can produce documentation showing you have the legal right to be here, you need to leave immediately." Of course, Karen had no such documentation. The so-called rule change had never been properly filed or recorded. It was all just Karen throwing her weight around. In the end, Karen and several other homeowner association board members were cited for trespassing. The responding officers strongly suggested that all residents review the legality of recent homeowner association rule changes with their attorneys. The fallout was fast and furious. Once other homeowners realized how Karen had been abusing her power and potentially exposing the homeowner association to massive liability, they were furious. An emergency meeting was called and Karen was voted out as president. The new board's first act was to rescind all of her ridiculous rule changes. I got my pool back, along with an official apology from the homeowner association and reimbursement for my increased utility costs. Karen tried to save face by claiming she was just trying to build community spirit, but no one was buying it. Last I heard, she was trying to sell her house and move away. These days, things are back to normal in Sunny Pines. I can enjoy my pool in peace again. Sometimes I'll invite the neighbors over for a cookout, but it's on my terms. And you can bet I read every word of those homeowner association bylaws now, and keep a close eye on who's running things. The moral of the story: know your rights, stand up to bullies, and never underestimate the power of a well-timed phone call to the authorities. Oh, and always be careful what you sign when you buy a house. You never know when someone might try to steal your pool. The next one is a petty revenge story. Back in the far-off days of '02, I lived in a duplex. The people in the other half of the duplex complained to the landlord all the time for nothing. As in, I was once woken up at 2:00 a.m. by my landlord calling to say that the neighbors reported me having a crazy loud party and keeping them awake. I was sleeping. I was alone. There were no lights on. There was nothing making noise. Well, I do snore. Basically, she complained about both petty and made-up things constantly. There's your background. So, on the property was a shed with a landlord-supplied electric lawnmower. I mowed my half one day and thought, what the hell, let's do their half too. However, the cord didn't reach to their whole yard from my outlet, so I plugged into their outlet for the last 10% of their side of the lawn. Next day, she threw a fit at me that I used her electricity. A long fit. A loud fit. I pretty much shook my head, threw my hands up, and walked away from it. I used pennies of your electricity to mow your lawn. I don't even expect gratitude. It's a small, unasked favor, but why bite my head off over it? Next day, she's got someone on her side installing those clear boxes over her 2 outlets with padlocks on them. Clearly a normal response. Petty revenge begins here. I take a gander when she's not home. Those locks are clearly the cheapest locks they could find at Walmart. I go to Walmart and buy 2 identical ones. They were like $6. One of my hobbies is lockpicking. I'm absolutely not a master. I'm probably not even good. But I sure as heck can open the cheapest padlocks ever made in seconds. I replaced the locks with my own. Looks exactly the same. Took a few weeks, but looking out my window one day to see her with an overgrown lawn and hearing her futilely slamming a hammer against the clear boxes for a half hour made all the frustration worthwhile. Next time, shut up and take the favor. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Backstory. This is another story about Sam and Murad. My manager, Sam, is extremely chill and an outstanding leader. His manager, Murad, is a stickler for the rules. I work as an infrastructure and configuration manager and happen to be one of the more expensive resources on the project from my domain. This story takes place in January 2023. The company was undergoing some restructuring, and most of our contracts included a last-in, first-out LIFO clause by default. When I joined in March 2022, I took a 10% pay cut to remove the LIFO clause from my contract because I was seeking job stability. Although I was still earning more than I did in my previous job, it was only 20% more instead of 30%. Story. As the infrastructure manager, I am responsible for maintaining all the product licenses the project uses. One of these product licenses requires a digital signature to function. Typically, such tasks require the use of service accounts which are owned by users. When someone leaves the organization, their service accounts are automatically transferred to their manager. Unfortunately, service accounts cannot have digital signatures, so I had to use mine in this case. The product activation process involves using the corresponding digital signature certificate, DSC. Since I already had a DSC for tax purposes, I decided to reuse it instead of obtaining a separate one. In India, DSCs are encrypted and require a one-time password, OTP, from my mobile number every time they are used. This mobile number must be associated with my national ID, Aadhaar, as that's how most encryption services work in India. Sam was on vacation, his first in 5 years. Apart from taking a one-day leave in 2018 when he moved from India to Europe, he had never even taken a sick day. He recently got married, and for his honeymoon he took a 2-month vacation to travel all over Europe with his new wife. In his absence, Murad was overseeing the project. Management asked Murad to cut 15% of his workforce. If you've read my previous posts, you would know that Murad was not pleased with me. So, the inevitable happened. I was called into a meeting with Murad and HR. Murad asked me to voluntarily resign, or else I would be let go. This is a tactic companies in India often use, as getting fired is considered a much bigger deal than simply losing a job. It's a cultural thing, I suppose. Being fired carries a stigma that most people want to avoid. HR usually tries to persuade people to resign voluntarily so that it doesn't become public knowledge that they were fired. This tactic often works well, as resigning saves the company from having to pay 3 months' salary, which they would owe if they were to lay off an employee. However, I knew better, so I refused his request. Murad was quite taken aback by this. Since I had called his bluff, he had to double down to show he meant business. By the end of the day, I received my termination email with instructions on how to return company property I had. Here's the MC. I replied to the email asking to schedule the return of the laptop promptly, as I needed to leave the city for a few days. Fake excuse. My objective was to have them pick up my laptop from my place and format it as soon as possible. This will be important later. By the end of the week, my laptop was picked up. I had already backed up a copy of my DSC, so there were no issues on my end. Fast forward to mid-February, and there was an issue with the product. A support ticket was raised, and the support team wanted to upgrade to the next version, as this was a known bug that had been resolved in the next version. The product was used once a week to create a weekly report, but no one really looked at it except for Sam, who was still on vacation. So its absence wasn't likely to be noticed for at least a full month. The end-of-the-month report would bring it to upper management's attention. Now, support SOP requires a license check, hence it required decryption of the existing license. Long story short, I received a call asking for the DSC and OTP, and I rejected. Murad eventually was informed, who asked the support team to provide a new license. The product support team informed him that they couldn't provide a new license without the company purchasing one. The license cost for this product was $200,000. At this point, Murad decided that they could live without the report. He mostly handled the team side of the project, so he wasn't really aware of the impact of this report. Sam returned from vacation at the end of February. By the first week of March, he noticed the missing weekly report and promptly called me. I informed him that Murad had fired me. Sam was quite perplexed, to say the least. Unlike Murad, he knew that the current license needed my DSC to work, so he asked if my DSC was available. I told him that my laptop had a copy, but it was taken. He checked the system, and sure enough, the laptop had been formatted. He asked me if there was any way to resolve the issue. I informed him that even if there were a way, I couldn't help him without being an employee. He asked me to wait for a few days. There is a quarterly meeting that takes place in the middle of every third month, attended by the CEO and top brass. At the March meeting, everyone noticed the missing report. The CEO asked why this important project was missing the report. Sam informed him there were about 90 people on the call, that a key person had been let go, and the report couldn't be prepared without spending $200,000 on a new license. Now, I heard the recording of this call after rejoining, so I'll share the relevant conversation below. CEO: is this related to the layoff? Sam: yes. CEO: why wasn't this person's work backed up? Why was he on the LIFO list if he was so key? Sam: he wasn't on the LIFO list. Murad jumps in: he joined less than a year ago. He must be on that list. CEO: let's discuss this offline after the call. I don't know what transpired in the offline meeting, but 2 days later I received a call from the head of HR offering me my job back. I asked for the following: a 100% raise and promotion to next level. Out of LIFO, obviously permanent WFH mentioned in contract, I keep the termination payout. Since it will be counted as a new job in my profile, a joining bonus, 20% of annual salary, I joined back at the 3rd week of March. I received a brand new laptop within 30 minutes of joining, hand-delivered at my home by someone from IT in my city. It took me 10 minutes to decrypt the license using my backed-up DSC, 30 mins to upgrade the product to next version. By end of lunch, CEO had the report in hand. My new promoted role offers a 60% increase in my medical insurance amount, a take-home company car, option to purchase company stock, and lots of other upgrades. I personally thanked Murad on my first week for the promotion and recognition by CEO in a team-wide call, the same 90 people, minus the top brass and CEO. The next one is an entitled people's story. So a while ago, me, my girlfriend, and her friends went to a fondue place for her birthday. It was a really popular spot, so when we got there were already 15-20 people waiting outside the restaurant. We put our names on the list and were hanging out chatting and waiting for our table. There were 2 outdoor tables with people eating while we waited, and one group finished up and left, leaving the table empty. Enter smart guy and his girlfriend. This guy walks up to a restaurant and sees 20-ish people standing outside around an empty table with used plates and silverware still on it, and just sits down at the table with a very smug look on his face like he's figured out a life hack that all the other people in line were too stupid to think of. Everyone outside is giving this guy the stink eye now. His GF, who unlike him does have the ability to feel shame, starts trying to tell him they need to put their name on the list and he can't just claim a table at a busy restaurant because nobody else is currently sitting there. The guy, who is fully being glared at by at least 6 other people a few feet away from him, doubles down and explains to her that that's not how it works. He was the first to claim the table and he doesn't want to move and give someone else the opportunity to take it. She tries in vain to argue, but smart guy just gets on his phone and continues tuning the rest of the world out. Then like 30 seconds later, a waitress comes out to clean the table, and when she sees him, she's like, "Yeah, you can't sit there, there's a huge waiting list. Do you seriously not see all these people around you?" And some people outside start laughing at him or making comments. GF is ducking mortified, and as soon as the guy sheepishly gets up, she insists they leave because she's too embarrassed to eat with him in public. It's just wild to me the way that some people will double down on behavior they know is wrong just because they think admitting their wrongness makes them look stupid. The next one is an entitled people's story. It was a peaceful summer evening when my wife and I returned home after a relaxing weekend getaway. As we approached our house, we couldn't believe our eyes. There they were, a group of strangers luxuriating in our pool as if it were their own. Outrage coursed through me, and I instinctively switched into a defensive mode. With a military background, I possessed the skills necessary to handle trespassers, and this situation demanded action. I confronted the intruders, demanding to know who they were and why they were on my property without permission. The mother of the group, their self-proclaimed entitlement oozing from every pore, explained that the previous owner had allowed them to use the pool whenever they pleased. Frustration welled up within me as I explained that we were the new owners and that we had every right to determine who could access our property. The entitled mother, blinded by her own audacity, accused us of being selfish for denying her children the relief of our pool in the scorching summer heat. It was a preposterous claim, considering the audacity of trespassing in the first place. My wife, typically mellow but equally incensed, retorted that the entitled mother must be a poor mother indeed if she couldn't provide cold water and fans for her own children. It was a well-deserved burn that fueled our determination to stand our ground. After the confrontation, the group stormed off to their house, leaving us with a foreboding sense that this was just the beginning. Our instincts proved accurate as a few weeks later, we discovered evidence of their intrusion. Empty beer bottles, a foreign towel, and even a used condom by our poolside. Enough was enough. Determined to protect our sanctuary, we took action. We installed a prominently displayed no trespassing sign and security cameras connected to our phones to monitor any unauthorized access. Our vigilance paid off when we received a notification one fateful Friday night that motion had been detected by the pool. We swiftly returned home, parking inconspicuously elsewhere to maintain the illusion of an empty house. Armed with the discipline instilled by my military training, I approached the trespassers with caution. My wife and I confronted them, demanding an explanation for their repeated transgressions. Their shock and fear were palpable as they hastily exited the pool, scrambling for their belongings. I made it clear that any further movement would be seen as a threat, even though I had no intention of resorting to violence. One of the girls tearfully pleaded to retrieve her clothes, and we tossed their belongings into the pool, a symbolic gesture that mirrored their disregard for our property. While my wife called the authorities, I ensured the intruders knew the consequences of their actions. The police arrived swiftly, and I calmly explained the situation, providing them with the evidence from our security cameras and pointing out the clearly displayed no trespassing signs. The law was on our side. The trespassers were charged with multiple offenses, including trespassing, indecent exposure, and possession of controlled substances. Justice was served as the perpetrators faced community service, hefty fines, and a restraining order to protect us from their entitled behavior. To add insult to injury, the entitled mother was held responsible for the expenses of draining, cleaning, and disinfecting our pool. Though some might label me harsh or vindictive, knowing that the entitled mother had to bear the weight of the consequences brought me a sense of satisfaction. Our sanctuary was restored, and we could finally enjoy our property without fear of invasion. The next one is a pro-revenge story. After years of hearing stories of problems with homeowners associations and having no tolerance for busybodies ourselves, my wife and I were both solidly in agreement that we would never purchase a home in an homeowners associations. When we finally did find a house and purchased it, we knew for a fact that we were not in an homeowners associations. However, just behind us, we learned there was a not really homeowners associations. About a week after we moved in, there was a knock on the door. One of the neighbors behind us announced that she was the president of the homeowners associations and welcomed us to the neighborhood. Seemed civil enough, but we asked, "What homeowners associations?" "Oh, we're behind you. The home behind yours is where the homeowners association starts." "Okay, that's nice. Nice to meet you. Just general pleasantries." We were hopeful. We were shocked even. Someone associated with the management of an homeowners associations that wasn't a complete busybody psychopath. How wrong we were. The way our lot was, there was a sliver of green space between our property line and the sidewalk, in a somewhat triangular shape. The street ran west-southwest, our property line ran due east-west. So there was a wedge of land there. We'd always been told that this belonged to the homeowners associations, yada yada. No big deal. Just meant we didn't have to deal with the upkeep of this land. Now that this setup is all in place, it's time to start the story of how we got the not really an homeowners associations dissolved. We had a couple of trees in our yard, literally on the property line, so we took responsibility for taking care of these things. They're massive. They're also a pain in the butt, incredibly dense, heavy, and because of the way the limbs grow, they're prone to splitting and dropping limbs. There was a huge limb that extended way out into the street adjacent to the green space owned by the homeowners associations. This thing was a major risk of dropping and severely injuring/killing someone. We didn't want that on our conscience or our insurance, and so we decided to take that limb down entirely, as well as clean out a lot of the deadwood in the two trees. Hired an arborist, they came out, did their thing. $1,400 later, we were left with some decent-sized rounds that we were going to move over the next weekend. I was out of town the first weekend after we removed the limb. I should note that the wood was neatly stacked in the green space on the bark dust, out of everyone's way, and in no way a hazard or eyesore. Enter the shrieking harpy president of the homeowners associations. My wife had stepped out the door the day I had left on my trip, and she pulls up into our driveway, rolls down the window, and starts yelling at my wife, "You need to move that wood now. That's private property of the homeowners associations. Move it now." My wife is not a confrontational type. She's also somewhat petite and tried to explain to the harpy that I was out of town and that we would be moving it as soon as I got back in town the next weekend. Nope, not good enough. She shrieks at my wife some more, and my wife ends up grabbing the wheelbarrow and somehow moves this stack of rounds. Some of them weighed close to 100 pounds. Around the fence, up our driveway, and into the backyard. She was pissed, so was I. We knew where the harpy lived, so when I got back I went over to talk to her and explained that I was rather displeased with how she treated my wife. I didn't pound on the door or act aggressively. They wouldn't answer the door. Cowards. We knew they were home. This left us with a displeased taste in our mouths. The next spring, the hedge that was planted outside of our fence line wasn't maintained very well and pushed over 2 sections of our wooden fence. So I emailed the harpy and explained that their hedge had damaged our fence. "It's not our hedge." It's growing in your green space?" "That's not our green space." "Wait, what?" Then why the censor did you decide to screech at my wife last summer when we had the wood stacked there? Silence. Well, at that point, I fixed the fence so our dog wouldn't escape, after pruning the laurel back sufficiently that it wouldn't damage the fence again. And I started making some phone calls. I contacted the county and ended up speaking to about 7 different departments in order to figure out who actually owned that strip of land. After probably 2 weeks of trying to find the right people to talk to, I got to the roads division. The green space was marked as part of the right-of-way for the road, and therefore no one actually owned that space. So I can chop down that ugly, overgrown hedge that's encroaching on the sidewalk and knocking down my fence? Yep, said the kind gentleman from the roads division. As an aside, he asked, you mentioned something about there being an homeowners associations associated with the plots to the east of your property? Yeah. Well, part of what took me so long to get an answer for you is that it turns out there is no homeowners associations registered with the county there. So we were looking in the wrong place entirely. Wait, there's no homeowners associations there? No, there hasn't ever been one since that subdivision was built. Huh, interesting. And a plot was hatched. Plot was. We had befriended a couple of people within the neighborhood behind us, and they were rather fed up with Miss President of the Homeowners Associations and her antics. She was the typical busybody, bullying anyone she didn't like, and apparently, for the last 10 years or so, she had been collecting Homeowners Associations dues from everyone in the neighborhood to the tune of $300 per year. There were 36 homes in the Homeowners Associations. That's right around $100,000 in dues for a non-existent Homeowners Associations, with no real maintenance. Oh, they hosted an annual block party, potluck style. They pulled weeds from the green space on a volunteer basis. So I did what any red-blooded American would do. I got 36 envelopes, 36 stamps, and printed off 36 copies of a letter with my findings from the county that there was not now, nor ever had been, for the recorded history of the subdivision, any homeowners associations, neighborhood association, or any similar organization, and that they, collectively, had paid in excess of $100,000 in dues over that time to a non-existent entity, plus any fines the non-existent homeowners associations had decided to levy. The neighbors, in turn, did exactly what any red-blooded American would do. They sued the hell out of her for every penny they'd paid over the last 10 years. And they won. And there's no longer an homeowners associations behind us. The next one is a petty revenge story. I am 22 used to live with 3 other guys. One of them had a girlfriend who was over all the time. She cleaned and bought stuff, so it was cool for a while. Then she asked us if she could pet sit 2 newborn kittens for a week while her parents were out of town. I knew I was allergic to dogs, but didn't know I was deathly allergic to cats. The cats get there, and after a day, I'm an allergic mess. However, I agreed to them staying. There's not much she can do with them, so I put up with it for a week. A week goes by, and the cats should be gone. I get home, and they are still there. The girlfriend says, "Oh, they're going to stay for another week." On top of that, the girlfriend's boyfriend, my roommate, his mom has fallen and hurt her neck pretty bad and is in the hospital, so now he is watching his dog at our apartment. So I try to keep cool. "Girl, the cats have gotta go. Sorry, the week is up. You can't just keep them here. I told you I'm allergic and you don't pay rent, so get them out." As for my roommate, I told him that I'm sorry about his mom, but that I can't keep living with animals I am allergic to. No one asked me if the dog could come, and no one asked me if the cats could stay longer. I suggest maybe they keep the animals at his girlfriend's apartment, who lives a whole mile away. "You are so ridiculous. You are crazy. My mom is in the hospital and you care about my dog being here," says my roommate. "I can't just bring these animals to my apartment. I have roommates. What are we, idiot?" I respond. I storm out of the apartment and immediately head to the leasing office. I tell them that we have 3 animals in our apartment and that we have not paid the pet fee, $500 per animal. I ask them to come by later and make up an excuse that the animals are being too loud, neighbors are complaining, and that we didn't pay our pet deposit. The next day I come home from class and the girlfriend is crying on the couch. The leasing office came by and said we had to get rid of the animals due to complaints. "Oh no," I respond. Luckily, they got a warning about the pets and didn't have to pay the $1,500. I suck at confrontation, so I love when other people can take the reins for me. The next one is an entitled people story. Backstory. My mom and dad split up when I was 12, and I, for one, was happy that they were separated. They were not bad people, they just weren't the right people for each other. My father still hasn't remarried, though he is currently dating someone. I don't really like her, but it's my dad's decision. My mom started dating a year after the divorce. She met my now stepfather, SF, who had a son. I became quite close to him since my biological brother went to live with my dad while I lived with my mom. When my mom announced her wedding, we were all excited, so SF's son became my official stepbrother, SB. Okay, we're done with the backstory. On to the real story. My SB and his girlfriend of 3 years were getting married. Now, the girlfriend happens to be my best friend, so I was extremely excited for them. I was chosen to be the maid of honor, and my biological brother, BB, was the best man. We were all that close. My SB's best friend, let's call him A, was one of the groomsmen. I never really liked A because he was a total creep and always tried to hit on me when my SB wasn't there. SB is quite protective, so I didn't tell him, or he would have been arrested for murder. Also, I can stand up for myself. Anyway, once A finally got a girlfriend, he stopped annoying me. During the planning of the wedding, nothing crazy happened apart from the normal wedding stress. We invited almost everyone we knew, and it was going to be great, or so we thought. The big day arrived and everyone was ecstatic. The ceremony was beautiful and everything went great. Then the reception came. It was going great. The groom, bride, bridesmaids, and groomsmen were all seated at a table at the front of the venue, while the guests were sitting in front of us, so they were facing our table. Everyone was giving speeches and enjoying the food. Then, out of nowhere, A stood up and took the mic, saying he had something important to say. We were all confused as he had finished his speech, but we let him talk. I wish we hadn't. He asked his girlfriend to come up to the table, and I already knew where this was going. He started a speech on how much he loved her, and how they were meant for each other. She was smiling, but I think she didn't want this to happen now, of all times. Then he knelt down and pulled a ring out of his pocket, asking her to marry him. She said yes. They started running around, showing people the ring, while my best friend, BFF, looked like she was going to cry. My SB and BB were whispering to each other, but I couldn't hear what they were saying. Finally, my mom got up to remind everyone that this was her son's wedding, and that we should stop talking about someone else's engagement. Everyone was quiet. Suddenly, we heard this banshee scream. The girlfriend started screaming and crying, saying my mom had ruined her special day. Then, A began screaming at us too, claiming that he did nothing wrong. They got kicked out in the end. My brother lost his best friend that day, but he didn't really care because that idiot lost all his friends. I'm also going to be a bit petty and say they can't even have a wedding because of COVID-19, so I hope they're happy. The next one is an entitled parent's story. Allow me to introduce you to my late mother-in-law. I'll call her Carol, for the sake of variety. Though I've heard many stories about her, for the most part, I'll stick with things that I witnessed myself. There are enough of them. I don't think Carol ever met a New Age concept that she didn't like. Her expressed goal was to synthesize all religion, science, and mysticism into a unified whole, all of it. To this end, she amassed a large collection of books and stranger objects from her travels, with a special focus on healing. Her library had volumes about vibration manipulation, curative trampolining, homeopathic color therapy, and on and on. I am not joking or exaggerating here. Her shelves had lots of admittedly pretty mineral crystals, along with bottles of magic goddess essence water, evaporated away, and bogus radon protectors, powered by diagrams of geometric figures. Her favorite book, based on the number of annotations and sticky notes, was hundreds of pages of word salad about spiritual beings from the star Arcturus. That's Arcturus, spelled with an H because of h-bar, Planck's constant from physics. Except that Planck's constant is denoted by H, and h-bar is the reduced Planck's constant. It's important to get the details right when you're dealing with spiritual beings. Her pentagonal home was custom built around an energy vortex that she discovered in the coastal peaks of British Columbia. Carol's parenting was, how shall I put this, more darkly eccentric. She was physically and emotionally abusive to her children. One still has some pencil lead embedded in his hand from when she stabbed him because she wasn't satisfied with his piano practice. She attacked one with a kitchen knife. She started slut-shaming her daughter, later my wife, as soon as she grew breasts, for growing breasts. So she forced her daughter to wear 2 large bathing suits, with the apparent intention of making said breasts look smaller by contrast, but with the actual effect that there were wardrobe malfunctions. She was ashamed that her daughter went into medicine and became a noted specialist rather than supporting her own non-traditional medical work. My wife got the hell out at age 17 and moved across the country to go to university. For most of the time after that, she went relatively low contact. A decade ago, my wife suffered from a surgical error which resulted in abdominal sepsis and asked me to call her mother. That made me understand just how deathly serious the situation was. I was to call in the family for what might be the last time. I hadn't grasped that her life was truly at risk until that point. Nothing less would have induced her to try to get her mother to visit. To her credit, Carol hurried out, for what was supposed to be a couple of weeks. It was expected that in that time, my wife would be either dead or on the road to recovery. Carol stayed in our home, and at first things didn't go too badly. For the most part, we just didn't talk about the treatments that my wife was undergoing. Carol did express concern about the antibiotics that were being given since, according to her own views, antibiotics did nothing but harm. But a couple of weeks stretched into a couple of months, and Carol became harder to live with. She was angry when I stroked my wife's hair with my hand because I was blocking the energy from her chakra. She started blaming me for having somehow caused the nausea that the botched surgery was supposed to cure. I drove her out to pick up a magical concoction of essential oils, on the condition that she check with one of the doctors before applying them. I pointed out that if the mixture had the power to heal, then it also had the power to cause harm, which Carol denied. When we got back to the hospital, I nabbed one of the residents when we reached my wife's floor to ask about that. Carol became furious about that, and it was clear that she had no intention of talking with the doctors. At home, she became more abusive to me. She claimed that I was abusing my wife by not letting her have her things in the house. At that point, I lost my temper, the first time I'd yelled at a person in literally a couple of decades. I told her that almost everything in sight was actually her daughter's, displacing my stuff, the sofas, the piano, tables and chairs, the bookshelves, and the electronics. The shelves for the CDs and DVDs were mine, but half the contents were hers. Carol wanted to know if I'd be continuing the herbal remedies after she left, and I told her that that was up to my wife. I'd continue them if she wanted. I'd stop them if she preferred. Carol screamed that I was abusing my wife by following her own wishes rather than her mother's. On the night before Carol was finally supposed to be heading out, I was restless. That particular nightmare was about to end, but my wife was still quite ill. I got to thinking about that essential oil mixture, which included both oil of cloves and oil of cinnamon. Those are both strongly irritating if left on the skin, and Carol had been painting my wife's feet with the stuff. Her feet were apparently the correct energy points to draw out the infection. I went online and found the manufacturer's instructions, which specified that the oil needed to be significantly diluted with some neutral oil if it was going to be applied to the skin. Carol hadn't even been using the stuff properly. Well, that explained why the skin on my wife's feet was yellow and starting to peel. But Carol was furious when I calmly pointed out the problems that she was creating out of ignorance. A few days after Carol left, my wife took a turn for the worse and had to go back into the intensive care unit, and I dreaded the phone call that I had to make, not because of the bad news, but because I anticipated how Carol would react. And she didn't disappoint. If you really loved her, you put her back onto the herbal oil and stop the antibiotics. You know perfectly well they don't do a damn lick of good. At which point I hung up. I had other things to worry about. My wife pulled through after months in the hospital and 3 stays in the ICU. She's still in poor health. I told her that I was putting my foot down. Under no circumstances was her mother welcome under my roof again. She had grossly abused her privileges as a house guest. I didn't care about the family custom that family members were always welcome to stay as guests. I would not stay under the same roof as her mother. Having heard my stories, and based on her own experiences, my wife agreed. A few years ago, Carol died, much as she had lived. She was diagnosed with metastasized lung cancer. Although she did undergo some real medical therapies, she relied mostly on her quack remedies, pawpaw twig powder, whey protein immune boosters, and the like, the usual crap that ethics-free swindlers pawn off on desperate sufferers. She firmly believed that all the little white spots on her lung x-rays were a good sign and that her rapid weight loss indicated that her boosters were draining the cancer away. If there's some existence after death, I hope she came to appreciate all of the harm that she did in life. Except, a couple of nights after she passed away, I was driving from the hospital back to the Energy Vortex house. The rental car's navigation device suggested a shorter route than I'd taken to get there, but that route turned into a back road, into a rough road in the hills, into a track through the forest and in pitch darkness apart from my headlights, over a rocky bump and directly into a tree trunk. Luckily, I was traveling slowly and stopped in time. As I paused, shaken, I got to wondering if there might be something to Carol's worldview after all, and if her vengeful spirit might have possessed the GPS device, making one last try at killing me.
The next one is an entitled people's story.
Once upon a time, in a bustling city filled with limited parking spaces, I found myself residing in an apartment complex with just a handful of parking spots. The struggle to secure a spot was a daily ordeal, as our small complex housed 8 units, each with the potential for 2 cars. You can imagine the chaos that ensued. To compound the problem, the assigned parking spaces were free, while the alternative across the street required constant payment. It was a situation ripe for exploitation, and exploit it my neighbor did, after she had already moved out. Allow me to explain. The girl next door had recently landed a new job within a 10-minute walk from our complex. It seemed like the perfect arrangement for her, as driving to work would incur additional parking expenses. So she cleverly opted to leave her car parked in our limited lot, saving herself a tidy sum. I couldn't help but think she was making a hasty decision by moving to a more expensive part of town, when a year of saving would have yielded greater benefits. Alas, my concerns were swept aside. Months passed, and a couple finally moved into the vacant unit next door. I naively assumed that the parking predicament would resolve itself, as our ex-neighbor no longer resided there. But alas, I was only half right. Her car was no longer occupying her old spot, it had claimed mine. Night after night, I returned home from my tiresome commute to find her car mocking me from my designated space. With her being at work during those hours, direct confrontation seemed impossible. Frustration built steadily within me as I was forced to resort to parking across the street and paying for overnight stays. The situation continued, each occurrence further fueling my irritation. The neighbor's constant disregard for my space weighed heavily on me, especially as I entered the tired and swollen state of pregnancy. Leaving a note felt petty and insignificant. I desired a face-to-face conversation to resolve the matter. Then came that fateful night when exhaustion consumed me. My fiancé had yet to return home, and there it was again, her car occupying my spot. The frustration reached its boiling point, and in a moment of defiance I called an emergency towing service. Guilt briefly flickered within me, but logic swiftly smothered it. I was tired of shouldering the expense of parking at my own home. While she reveled in her sense of entitlement, my pregnancy only magnified my distress. At the crack of dawn the following morning, our tranquil home was shattered by furious pounding on our door. My fiancée opened it, and there she stood, our ex-neighbor, screaming and sobbing uncontrollably. Curiosity led me to the doorway, and I was greeted by a barrage of accusations and tears. Unflinchingly, I explained that her car had been towed as a result of her unauthorized parking in my spot. We were weary from our long hours and had grown tired of this injustice. It was not a crime to seek comfort during pregnancy and avoid the hassle of distant parking. Her anger escalated, and she threatened to sue us for the towing expenses, as she couldn't retrieve her car from the impound lot. Angrily, I advised her to order an Uber and dismissed her by slamming the door shut. Little did I know this would only be the beginning of our battle. The next day, my fiancée informed me that one of her friends had taken to social media to vilify us. According to her friend, our ex-neighbor was struggling to pay rent, and we had heartlessly abandoned her. While empathy coursed through my veins, I couldn't help but feel she had brought this situation upon herself. She had chosen to move to a more affluent part of town without considering the financial consequences. Instead of engaging in a mature conversation with us, she had resorted to entitlement and manipulation. Fueled by a sense of injustice, my fiancé blocked her friend's messages, effectively cutting off any further attempts to tarnish our reputation. Days turned into weeks, and we heard nothing from our ex-neighbor. Our parking spot remained unoccupied, a small victory in the ongoing battle. In the meantime, my pregnancy progressed, and the anticipation of becoming a parent brought both joy and anxiety. I had resolved to put the parking ordeal behind me, focusing on the well-being of our growing family. However, fate had other plans in store. One evening, as the sun cast its golden glow over the city, we received a certified letter in the mail. Opening it with a mix of curiosity and trepidation, we discovered that our ex-neighbor had indeed followed through on her threat. She had filed a lawsuit against us for the towing expenses and emotional distress caused by the incident. The world seemed to shrink around me as panic set in. How could I handle the stress of a legal battle while nurturing new life within me? Doubts gnawed at my resolve, but deep down I knew I had to fight. I had to protect the well-being of my unborn child and the sanctity of our home. Summoning every ounce of courage, we engaged the services of a competent attorney. Days turned into weeks as legal proceedings unfolded. The courtroom became a battleground where truths and falsehoods clashed, each side fighting tooth and nail for victory. The tension was palpable, and the fate of our family hung in the balance. Witnessing the strength and resilience of a pregnant woman fighting for justice, the court was captivated. The jury, swayed by the sheer absurdity of our ex-neighbor's claims, delivered a resounding verdict in our favor. We were exonerated from all charges, and our ex-neighbor's attempt to exploit the legal system had crumbled before our eyes. The next one is a pro-revenge story. This story primarily takes place between me and Crappy Neighbor, who is a member of my community's HOA. Sorry if it's a bit long. As a bit of background, my 3 roommates and I moved into a housing community consisting of cookie-cutter townhomes. All of these homes have garages that open onto streets winding through the community. This is important later, with the front doors opening to a path on the other side of the house. Additionally, there are free parking spots on the edge of the community where there are no houses. When we first moved in, we quickly found out that parking could be a bit of a pain during the day, especially when people had guests on weekends. Admittedly, my roommates and I have more cars than the average family. Since we usually have to commute for work, each of us has 1 car. We try to make parking easier by using the garage, but due to our sporting equipment, we can usually only fit 1 car in there. When all the parking in the free spots is full, we park our cars right up against the garage and leave them there during the day or overnight. We've seen other neighbors do it, and it still leaves ample room for people driving on the street to pass by. One day, Crappy Neighbor approached us while my roommates and I were in the garage organizing some stuff. He told us that we couldn't park there overnight as it's against community rules. Before we had a chance to respond, he added, "And if you do it again, I will personally make sure you're towed." His first comment was reasonable since we had just moved in and didn't know the rule. However, his second comment made him sound like an ass and was unnecessary. One of my roommates simply responded that we didn't know about the rule as we had just moved in, and we wouldn't park there overnight anymore. Crappy Neighbor, clearly trying to assert his dominance, responded with, "Good, you better not because I'll be watching." From then on, we followed the rules. If we parked in front of our garage during the day, we made sure to move before going to sleep. This worked out for a while until one fateful day. One of my roommates stopped by quickly after work to grab some dinner and clothes before heading to his girlfriend's. It was around 7 p.m., so he parked up against the garage as it would be quicker than the parking spaces. Plus, it was early enough that he didn't think he'd get towed. Around 8 p.m., he went to head out, but his car was gone. Guess who was there, though? Crappy Neighbor standing right outside. Immediately, he said to my roommate, "I told you you were going to get towed if you parked here again." Crappy Neighbor and my roommate argued for a bit before my roommate came back inside and called the car lot. Turns out they were closed, so he would have to get his car in the morning. The kicker? They were going to charge him an overnight fee. All in all, it came out to $500, which isn't a small amount of money for us. This neighbor has been an ass to us since we moved in, and even though it wasn't my car that was towed, I took this personally. To make sure we didn't get towed again, we decided to read the community rules. Lo and behold, we found out that the street in front of the garage is actually considered a fire lane, and no one is supposed to park there at any point during the day. Between Crappy Neighbor treating us like crap, and the fact that we could hear him yelling at his wife every night, not a big detail to the story, but just wanted to add to my point that this guy just sucked. I started to plan my revenge. Since quarantine started, I've been able to work from home, and my desk conveniently overlooks the street between the houses. This means I can clearly see Crappy Neighbor's garage. I started to take notice of when he parked his car out in front of his garage. For about 2 weeks, I noticed that he would come home around 1 p.m. and leave again at 2 p.m. On the third week, I decided to initiate my revenge. On Monday, true to his schedule, he stopped by around 1 p.m. After about 10 minutes, I called the tow company and informed them that he was parked in the fire lane and requested them to come and remove his car. 20 minutes later, a tow truck rolled up, hooked his car, and towed it away. About 15 minutes later, Crappy Neighbor came out, and I could hear him start to yell back into his house, presumably at his wife. He then left and didn't return until later that evening after retrieving his car. It was funny to do this, and I made sure to send snaps to my roommates who don't work from home, but I wasn't done yet. The next day, this jackass apparently didn't learn his lesson because he parked in front of his garage again. So, what did I do? Well, I did the exact same thing as the day before, of course. Once again, Crappy Neighbor came out, realized his car was gone, yelled at his wife, and then went to retrieve it. After this time, he became a bit smarter and started parking in an actual spot before going in to get his lunch or whatever he did there midday. He did this for about 2 weeks before deciding that it was okay to park in front of his garage again. Guess who was still sitting at their desk every day, immediately noticing this? Well, me, of course. Being the concerned resident that I am, I immediately called the tow company, and off his car went again, and, again, this was met with yelling. I wish this had a more satisfying ending, but after the third time, I decided to stop because I genuinely felt bad for his wife, whom he seemed to yell at the most as if it was her fault that he was a dumbass. However, I can tell you that it definitely cost him over $1,000. If he hadn't gotten my roommate's car towed, we would have never discovered that fun little rule. The best part was that many of my neighbors would have their cars parked there at the same time, and they'd never have their cars towed, which made it all the better when his car was. We've had several other encounters with him since this happened, and I have another ongoing story involving the actual HOA that I'll probably write about later. We'll see how that one ends up. The next one is a petty revenge story. My fiancé and I had been dating for 4.5 years. In that time, we bought a house together, adopted dogs together, and I put him through pharmacy school, med school, and lots of people don't realize that pharmacists get their doctorates or how competitive pharmacy can be. We fell even more in love. He's an amazing man, and I'm crazy about him. Imagine my excitement that after braving all of the ups and downs and watching life unfold as a team, he proposed. I was overjoyed, and through tears of happiness I said yes, and of course, our dogs were involved. It's a larger, slightly blush pink amethyst stone with a halo of topaz around it, set in rose gold. I loved it. It was perfect. The next day, I was attending a baby shower for my best friend in my hometown. I trekked my way there, and even though I tried to downplay the engagement because I wanted it to be about her, she made a mini announcement because I knew people who were there. Most people did a little congrats type thing, which was nice, except for her cousin. This girl, let's call her Amy, is super religious. Actually, everyone from my hometown is super religious, and I appreciate their faith, but I didn't like her judgment. She has voiced her opinions before about how people shouldn't live together unless they're married and all that jazz. So when she sauntered over, she took my hand in hers and scrutinized the ring. She more or less said that at least he was making an honest woman out of me, and that he had taken too long to propose. Then she kind of scrunched her nose at my ring and asked what kind of stone it was, with a little snobby half-smile on her face. She also said that it was generic that he would ask me now that he's graduating because that's what everyone does. I don't know what came over me. I love my ring, and I've never been this mean girl, but I've known Amy for a while, and she's always been like this. She likes to say what terrible decisions other people have made, and how she always puts Jesus first. So that's why her life has turned out so well. She says it's because she has followed his plan, which ultimately led to her getting married ridiculously young to a guy who really isn't good for her at all and just leeches off of her. She had to put herself through school and work while he would go on long stints out of the country to find himself and follow God's path, which I really think meant bang other women. She married him in the middle of a college year before one of the times he left. I suspect to entice him to come back and have commitments here. Well, I went for it. I said, "Oh, he waited until he knew he could provide for me. It's a pink diamond." Her whole face changed from smug to envious. She practically threw my hand down and mumbled how happy she was for me. I looked up how big my petty lie had been later, only to find out that yes, pink diamonds are actually a thing, and the teeny ones are like $10,000. But hey, she doesn't have to know how poor we are. We are rich with unconditional love and loyalty, and that's why I'm happy to call him my future husband. Addition. I'm brimming with pride and excitement to show you my ring. Thanks for all of your support and well wishes. I hope it works. The next one is an entitled people story. In line at Costco gas, the lines are nuts because gas prices are crazy, and Costco gas is cheap and convenient. Everyone is on edge. The Costco gas employees have to periodically sweep the lanes and clean up spilled gas. Just like at the registers, when they close a line, they stop people from lining up in that lane. They finish serving the people currently in the queue and direct other customers into different lanes so they can block off the lane and sweep. I'm pumping gas and see this go down. A woman drives around the cones and into the lane they are sweeping as if she's exempt from the process and is going to get gas. An employee guy jogs over and tells her in a normal tone, "Sorry, ma'am, this lane is closed for the moment. Can you please pull around into a different line?" She asks, "Why?" He replies, "This lane is closed." He sees an empty spot not yet filled in the adjacent lane. "You can go there," and points. She starts screeching, "You don't have to talk to me that way. I don't appreciate it. Screech, screech, screech." A guy gets out of the passenger seat. The employee guy is babbling and waving, pointing at cones, the empty lane, and the broom. The screeching lady turns into a cursing lady and starts dropping expletives about how he can't treat her like this and using profanity. The passenger guy gives the employee the finger. The employee looks around because he's in over his head. The cursing lady begins with, "Your manager is going to hear about this. You just lost your job. Screech, screech." She gets in her car and peels out, leaving. I finish pumping gas and go find a place to park. I Google the store's phone number and call. I press the number to speak with a manager. I ask for the manager in charge of the gas station. "Sorry, he's gone for the day. Can I leave a message?" Okay, can I tell you then? I just saw this whole thing go down. In a minute, you're going to get a call from a lady claiming she was just disrespected by a gas employee and complaining up a storm. Let me tell you what actually happened from an objective observer, because there's no way this guy did anything wrong, and it's going to come down to his word versus the crazy lady's. "Okay, thank you for the heads up. It's nice to hear he was doing the right thing, and, oh, actually, your lady is on the phone with another manager right here, it sounds like, and I'll pass along your message, thanks for calling." The next one is an entitled parent story. Okay, so I was talking with my current girlfriend and told her about this story that happened about 3 years ago. For context, I have a German Shepherd named Deuce. I got him as a gift when I was 21, 26 now, and he is the nicest dog you'll ever meet. He's nice around other dogs. I've never seen him bite anyone, and he loves kids, important for later. At the time, I was fresh out of college and had recently gotten a job at a tech company. I moved out to my current neighborhood, which was not only close but had ample backyard space since Deuce loves to run. I found a house and moved there. After about a month of moving in, I saw one of my neighbors outside, a nice older fellow we'll call Hank. I approached Hank and struck up some friendly small talk before telling him about Deuce. His face immediately became worried and he said, "You might want to keep him inside. Karen hates dogs." I asked who that was, and he pointed to the house on the other side of mine and explained that she absolutely despises dogs and once called the police on a man walking his dogs, accusing them of intentionally pooping on her lawn. I, of course, decided to laugh this off, said goodbye to Hank, and went back inside to check on Deuce. Fast forward a week, and I let Deuce outside in the backyard to run, watching him to make sure he didn't try to climb over the fences. He had tried doing this when my parents were watching him. I then see a kid approach Deuce from the other side of the gate. We'll call him LG for Little Goblin. So Goblin called over to Deuce, saying, "Doggy, doggy," and I thought it was cute, so I went over to say hello. When I realized he had a wooden stake in his hand, he then slashed at my dog with it when he got close enough. But since he's a kid, his stubby arms couldn't reach Deuce through the fence before I called him back. I then went over and asked him what he was doing. Note, I wasn't even yelling, I had just raised my voice a bit. The kid, having realized he had been caught, threw the stake near his shed and ran back inside. I didn't think much of it and let Deuce back inside to double-check to make sure he was all right. That's when I heard a knock at my door. I opened it, and of course there was Karen with her little goblin behind her. "Are you the one who yelled at my kid?" I took a deep breath and said, "I didn't yell at him, but I did raise my voice a bit." She cut me off, saying, "How dare you yell at my baby?" I then tried to explain, "Well, miss, your baby tried stabbing my dog." She looked over my shoulder and saw Deuce laying on the couch. "No, he did not! My little gremlin would do no such thing. Besides, even if he did, your dog probably had it coming." This is when I started to lose my cool a bit and simply said, "What?" She then went on a rant about how that type of dog is dangerous and how people like you are the reason people get mauled by dogs. I simply ignored her and said bye, before closing the door in her face and giving Deuce a treat. About an hour later, there's another knock at my door. I rolled my eyes thinking it's Karen again, but I was surprised when it was the police. I opened the door and said, "How can I help you, officer?" I saw Karen standing behind them with a crap-eating grin on her face. "Officer 1, we received a report that your dog attacked this child. Is this true, sir?" Me, having realized what Karen did. "No, officers. Her child attempted to stab my dog. She should have been watching him." Officer 2, "Can you back up that statement?" Me, "Sure, check near her shed. You'll see the thing he tried to stab him with." The officers checked and found the stake, but for some reason they still weren't 100% convinced. Officer 1, "Can we see the dog in question?" I called out Deuce, and he came running out, excited to meet the new people. I gave him some commands, and he gladly obeyed them in front of the cops. Me, "See, he's a very obedient dog. He would never hurt a kid." Then from behind me I heard, "It's true." I turned to see Hank. He had been out mowing his backyard and saw the entire thing. Hank, "I saw it with my own eyes, officers. The kid had something in his hand and tried using it on the dog." The cops then asked Karen for her side of the story, and she made up some obviously fake lie about how I made Deuce attack her kid for playing too loud, and that I should be arrested for child endangerment. The cops looked at each other, turned to me, apologized, turned to Karen, and gave her a fine for lying to the police and wasting their time. Karen was in disbelief that her hastily thrown together story didn't work. For the next week or so, anytime I would let Deuce out, I would watch him very closely. I got a few dirty looks from Karen and an email from her saying she was going to sue me for child endangerment and emotional distress. But nothing ever came out of it. Hank and I still talk about this event and laugh at it to this day.
The next one is an entitled people's story.
It all started with a simple shared driveway. Picture two houses with a narrow strip of pavement that leads to our respective garages in the backyard. The concept was easy enough. When a car occupies the driveway, no one can enter or exit. Unfortunately, my neighbor had a different interpretation of sharing. He made it his mission to avoid any form of cooperation with me. While I only owned a single pickup truck, he possessed 2 cars and often left one parked in the driveway. I pleaded with him numerous times to keep his second car at the back near his garage, allowing me some space to maneuver. Though he complied on those occasions, he did so begrudgingly. The situation deteriorated when he started encouraging his guests to park in the driveway, resulting in a lineup of cars extending all the way to the garages. Frustration built within me, and I reiterated the need for him to respect the shared space and find alternative parking arrangements for his visitors. He assured me that he would address the issue during the upcoming weekend, raising my hopes that we had finally reached a breakthrough. On a lazy Saturday morning, I emerged from my house only to be met with a shocking sight: a fence erected in the middle of the driveway. My anger surged, and I stormed toward his front door, hardly containing my frustration. Upon his arrival at the door, I struggled to maintain a calm demeanor. Me, "What is with the fence?" Neighbor, "Well, since you seemed so concerned about the driveway situation and felt the need to meddle in my affairs, I decided to build a fence along the property line. It's important to note that the fence was not situated in the exact center. Instead, it encroached so far into my side that he could still squeeze his cars in and out, while my own vehicle had no hope of escape." Me, But my car is in my garage. I have no way to get it in or out anymore. Neighbor. Well, that's where the property line lies. You should have found street parking like everyone else. His mocking tone signaled the futility of reasoning with him. In reality, the property line divided the driveway right down the middle. Erecting a fence there would obstruct both of us. Giving up on any hope of an apology, I resolved to exact revenge and make his life a living hell. Unbeknownst to him, I had a demanding job located a considerable distance away. Now, not only did I have to bear the cost of commuting by train, but I intended to ensure he paid for every penny of it. I promptly contacted the city and requested a land surveyor to inspect the unauthorized fence that had trapped my car. While fences were permitted in our area, it was clear that his structure violated regulations. Not only could my neighbor not produce a permit for the fence's placement, but he even tried to deceive the surveyor by claiming that the driveway wasn't shared. He went so far as to fabricate ownership of both properties, asserting that I was merely a tenant. The surveyor saw through his lies and chose to measure the property line. Surprisingly, it turned out that my initial assumption was incorrect. Around 80% of the driveway fell within the boundaries of my property. Seeking clarification about installing a fence in the backyard, away from the driveway's vicinity, I learned that it would be a straightforward process. In the meantime, my neighbor was ordered to remove his fence immediately. Armed with the legal documents, I initiated the second phase of my plan, taking him to civil court to recover the train ride expenses. To my disappointment, he failed to appear, and the court ruled in my favor. With my money rightfully reclaimed and the driveway accessible once again, I decided it was time to teach my neighbor a lesson he would never forget. I obtained the necessary permits to build a fence and wasted no time in having it installed in my backyard, strategically positioned near his garage. As the fence started taking shape, my neighbor rushed out, his face turning a deep shade of red, and began hurling expletives at me. Neighbor. What do you think you're doing? This is my garage. Me. I'm building a fence on my side of the property. I have all the necessary permits and paperwork to prove it. Neighbor. This is my half of the yard. I'll sue you for blocking me in. A wide grin spread across my face as I held up copies of the official documentation. Me. Actually, I won't be directly blocking your driveway. The permit and the land adjuster's assessment clearly state that up to the point where your garage begins, it is my property. I have every right to build a fence and gate in my backyard. Stunned, my neighbor seemed at a loss for words. I hadn't mentioned it before, but he often used the entire backyard to host parties when he had guests. Now, with the fence dividing the space, he was left with a mere fraction of his previous entertaining area. To add insult to injury, I positioned a sign where the fence started, warning that illegally parked cars would be towed. No one dared to test me on this, and I enjoyed the luxury of easily maneuvering my truck in and out of the driveway every day. While my neighbor no longer spoke to me, I considered it a welcome consequence. I once spotted him attempting to argue with a different land adjuster, claiming that my fence was illegal. However, to his dismay, they informed him that there was nothing they could do. Revenge truly is sweet. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Here's some backstory. I have a 4-year-old Cocker Spaniel named Charlie, and he likes to poop. I let him out in my front garden every morning for his toilet routine, same in the evening. We don't have a boundary fence separating my garden from my neighbor's, besides a row of bushes. That being said, Charlie has never crossed or pooped beyond these bushes. Every week I collect the poop before it accumulates into a disturbing amount. I've been doing this for the past 4 years to keep my front garden looking good and odor-free. One day I came home from work to find that my neighbors weren't happy about finding dog poop in my front garden. I instantly went to collect what was there, but there wasn't much, and it was nowhere near the boundary where our gardens meet. Fast forward a week, and my neighbor complained again about the dog poop in my garden, but this time, they threatened to hurt my dog if he continued to poop there. This time, I wasn't so nice about it and stated that it's my garden and my dog can do as he pleases. Now I know dog poop can be annoying, but when it's not in your garden and there's no smell due to decent airflow and an open front garden, is it really justified to threaten a man's dog over some poop? Anyway, after months of dealing with these petty issues and daily shade being thrown at me for having a dog, I decided to declare war on my neighbors. I knew these people pretty well. They had just moved in, and we let them use our Wi-Fi for a couple of months until they got theirs sorted. I picked up a few things about them, and one of them was how OCD they were. They mowed their back garden every week, and painted the entire bottom layer of the house to match their fence. This was all the fuel I needed to exact my revenge. My first step was to start off small. I knew they liked things to match, so I painted my fence gate bright pink instead of matching it with my fence. This was my first small victory. They hated it so much they begged me to correct the color, so I did. I figured if peace was an option, it was worthwhile. Then the animosity began again. I had to come up with something so evil and yet genius that couldn't be traced back to me. This is when I planted over 5,000 dandelion seeds in their front and back gardens. I knew I was in this for the long game. I did this under the cover of night and made sure to plant them in places not easily mowed. Fast forward 3 months and their garden was covered in weeds. They grew through all the paving slabs and were scattered all over the garden. It took them over 3 days to clear the weeds and cost them around 100 pounds for weed killer. The next one is a petty revenge story. I work as a bartender in a small cocktail bar for some time now, and I'm usually chill, but bullies can still push my buttons in a wrong way. Before starting, I may be in the wrong for doing this, but it is what it is. A week ago, a bunch of guys came for a few. They seemed like okay dudes, early 20s, but the group dynamic was kinda off, introducing the main antagonist. Obnoxious guy, too loud, snapping his fingers at me when ordering, don't snap fingers at bartenders' kids, we're not dogs. Punching his friends in the shoulders all the time. A sportier, really aggressive version of a David Spade character he was. Next to David Spade sat the victim of most of his playful teasings. Silently enduring his crap, I really felt sorry for this fellow. He wasn't a drinker, but he looked like he would rather be drinking distilled devil's piss than continue sitting next to this macho maniac. He was really uncomfortable. David continued to bug him to take a shot at least. Come on, one with me, don't be a pussy, ya idiot. Until, after a whole night of persuasion, finally my dude waved the white flag. Okay, let's do one shot together, then leave me be. 2 of your most ducked up shots, Spade shouted, snapping his fingers, while I imagined snapping his neck. Oh, you'll get a ducked up shot, buddy. I made these 2 layered shots, but while looking almost the same, they were different. David got stuff like Red Jacques Sano Absinthe, 75% alcohol, Stro, 80% alcohol, Tabasco, 110% flaming diarrhea. Really nasty business altogether, and the other guy got mostly syrups, juices, harmless stuff. They looked almost identical. Red absinthe can pass visually as cranberry juice, Stro as a syrup from brown sugar, Sambuca as anything colorless, etc. They took their shots and all hell broke loose. The other guy chugged his shot like a champion, not even flinching. Why would he? He drank juice. But David Spade... Boy, oh boy. He looked like he'd have a brain aneurysm. Tears pouring from his eyes, coughing like his lungs want to come out. He had a face and a posture of a man who just got waterboarded with some sort of chili sauce. The other guy looked surprised until he caught a wink from me. But David Spade and the rest of the crew, now roaring with laughter about his misery, suspected nothing. They got their shots on the house, the poor dude was left alone, and David was a good boy for the rest of the night, deflatedly enduring small mockings from his fellows. Now, I may have used my powers in a wrong way, but this is the first and only time I messed with customers' drinks, and I regret nothing. He was rude, aggressive even, to everyone around him. Duck you, sporty David Spade. The next one is an entitled people story. Just found out why there were a bunch of flashing lights and loud sirens on the street behind mine last night, and I am gobsmacked. The family that used to live in the house behind mine, whoever so helpfully called the police on me after I gave them a heads up about their Wi-Fi, has moved out. A new family has moved in. Our houses are separated by a couple 100 feet and a brush line. I found this out because they came to talk to me last week about my smoking a joint before I go to bed on my porch, and how the smell is terrible and it's bothering them, and I just need to not do that. Note: I smoke precisely 1/2 gram joint on my screened-in porch before bed, perhaps 3-4 times a week. The likelihood that any of the smoke from that is going anywhere near their house is slim to none. I told the new back neighbors I'll turn a ceiling fan on to thin out the smell, but I'm not going to get eaten alive by bugs just before bed because they don't want me to smoke on my own property. Porch is screened in. I guess this answer didn't satisfy them because last night, one of them came up with a cunning plan to get back at me. They dug a hole in their lawn, built a fire with a bunch of green pine wood so it'd be extra smoky, started the fire, and then put a box fan pointed at my porch next to the fire and went inside. 3 guesses what happened. If you guessed they set their own house on fire, you would be correct. One of their next-door neighbors called cops because some cinders from the fire set my back neighbor's house on fire. I have no idea how much the fire damaged the house, only that the people who lived there got arrested and given an impressive set of fines for negligence and a bunch of other things. Did I mention my county is under a fire weather warning, and all of those fines are multiplied? The juiciest part, and the reason I decided to post here about it, was that one of the cops was talking to the neighbors who were going on and on about the awful pot smell that I was causing and making the house uninhabitable. The cop sniffs a little bit and tells them that's not marijuana, that's a skunk. The next one is an entitled parent story. I'm going to correct the grammar and spelling mistakes in the story while preserving the context and details. Here's the revised version. I'm just going to continue being an attention seeker since my stories about my parents do so well on this sub. Just a reminder, I'm sharing these stories because they're entertaining, not because I'm looking for sympathy. I'm already in therapy before anyone comments on that. This one is fresh off the press, as it just happened yesterday. My parents' favorite thing to accuse me of is being a manipulative liar. Which is funny because I'm genuinely the world's worst liar. I'm too dumb to be good at it, and I instantly get nervous and start stuttering just because of the sheer stress. I've always been more comfortable being honest, even when it's gotten me in trouble. It gets me in trouble a lot with my parents because they really don't like to be told what they don't want to hear. Those of you who may have read the first post I made on this sub might remember my parents are, let's say, wary of modern medicine. They don't like mental health professionals of any kind. They are selectively anti-vaxxers. They're okay with some vaccines, but they're convinced that others will turn you inside out, depending on what articles reach them on Facebook. And they don't believe in certain kinds of treatments or procedures for various ideological reasons that are all very silly. Just to paint a picture, my mother has given me healing crystals more than once for various ailments I've gone through. They are lucky my brother and I never got gravely ill as children. I was having a perfectly normal conversation with my mother on the phone yesterday when I accidentally let slip that I had a consultation booked a week from now with a doctor. I hadn't mentioned it to my parents at all because it's one of those medical procedures they do not approve of. I still hadn't come up with a good lie as to why I was going back into surgery in a few months or so, or how I could maybe explain it away. My mother, already ready to go off upon hearing this, asked me what for. I rolled a 1 on persuasion. I just couldn't come up with anything that would satisfy them on the spot. My mother started going off on me for lying, and my father started yelling in the background too. They started making threats to get me off the family's insurance plan for wasting resources, which would suck because my meds cost $350 a month. I just started a new job and my benefits won't kick in for another 2 months. I got off the phone with them. At lunch, I decided I was just going to rip the bandage off then and there. I told them over text the truth, that I knew they react badly, and that if they were really going to take me off the insurance plan, to let me know as soon as possible so I can hop on Blue Cross. They called me a few hours later. My mom went off telling me that it's your choice, but you're hurting me by doing it and hurting me for lying about it. She's crying. I honestly wanted to just start laughing. My dad disagrees. He informs me that he feels that this is a family matter, that he wants me to come down to their house so it can be discussed in person. My body, my health, a family matter. For context, I don't have a car. Their house is in another city, in an area where if no one drives me, I'm trapped there. I tell him no, that I only told them so there's no confusion why I'm going back in for surgery. And this is the last time it's going to be brought up. That I refuse to talk about it further. And I'm not stranding myself with them only to get cornered about it. That's the point at which my father drops the zinger. With all this lying and manipulating and you trying to tear the family apart like this, I feel like I'm being abused. Stunning. I got off the phone with them and have their contacts blocked for right now so I can focus on my job, which is the best job I've ever had, best paying, good benefits, and good work. I'm putting this in here as a reprieve. They'll get over it. I'll start my application to Blue Cross just in case. It will be cheaper than paying in full for my meds. The next one is an entitled people story. I'll start this off by saying my ex is vindictive as hell. We've been fully divorced since right before the pandemic started. We sold the house we shared and I didn't have to pay her alimony because she cheated. and we're in an at-fault state. It was messy since D-Day. All of the stereotypes. First the sobbing and then trickle truths saying, "I love you. It was just one time. Okay, it was 2 years." And then the gaslighting followed by "I'm gonna take you for everything," before packing her stuff and walking out. I feel like I never really knew the woman my ex was in all the time we were together. We were married for 5 years and together for 7. And in 2 of those 5 married years, she had affairs with 3 other men. The final one being a foreign businessman of some sort from what I could find out. Yes, I got tested for STDs, and was thankfully negative. Yes, she got pregnant by the final affair partner. And no, I didn't sign the birth certificate because I found out about all the affairs before the baby was born thanks to a call from the first affair partner. My ex tried to go full scorched earth on me, but since we live in and were married in an at-fault state, she lost. We didn't pay equally into our house, and the equity was divided 70-30. So I got a pretty good cash payout when I sold our marital home to put as a down payment on a different house closer to my job. It's a bit of a downgrade, but it suits a single guy in his 30s like me just fine. My ex did show up at my house once, but I refused to let her in. She idioted at me that I'd financially ruined her in the divorce. I said that if she was fully willing to do that to me first, and the audacity of that idiot to say it should have been my life ducked over, not hers. I laughed so hard and said it was karma. She yelled that she'd sue me for what was rightfully hers. I said if she was gonna sue me, then go ahead and sue me. It'd end up the same way in court because she has nothing but a false sob story. She was the cheater, not me. I'm no angel, but I didn't do anything to her, and she was the one who ruined our marriage. She then said she'd tell everyone she could that I abused her. I said I'd sue her for defamation if she did, and I was recording our interaction and had those words saved to my phone. She went wide-eyed, and her jaw dropped, the look people are calling the surprised Pikachu face. Then I asked why she was there, if not to just try and make trouble, because she had a new man in her life that knocked her up. She just huffed at me and said he isn't around much, and she's stuck in a tiny apartment living off his child support till he comes back. It was immature of me, I know, but I did the bit of playing the world's smallest violin. She yelled at me to go duck myself, and I yelled back that I'd sooner do that than her any time. She raged at me and then got in her car to leave. Haven't seen her since. There is an homeowners associations in my neighborhood, but I was not legally obligated to join it because the last owner of my house was not a member. I made sure of that through a real estate lawyer as well. The homeowners associations had no grounds to force me to join, and were not happy about it. The homeowners association's president would show up with forms every week for the first month demanding I sign them. Then she threatened to take me to court, to which I had to get a C&D sent to her from my lawyer to make her stop that. So she started harassing me by looking for any infractions she possibly could to report to the city. An inspector came out several times and found nothing wrong. In fact, I offered one of them a burger while grilling, and they graciously accepted. Did I mention the homeowners associations hates barbecues and parties that aren't approved in advance? Well, they do. And I like to grill when the weather is good. And my neighbors actually love me for it because I invite them over. I had the police called on me several times for noise complaints because I was playing music on a Saturday afternoon while having my friends over. The homeowners association's president I caught trespassing once when she was trying to peer into my windows. I called the police, but she denied ever doing it, so I got cameras. She hasn't trespassed since. But I still got repeated passive-aggressive letters saying my cameras were not an approved addition to my house. Some months ago, I started getting letters for fines in the mail, and when I contacted the homeowners associations, their representative claimed they had it on record that I'd joined and needed to pay all fees effective immediately. I told them that was not possible. Then they emailed a scanned copy of the forms, and they had a signature on them, but it was not mine. It was very similar in some ways, and I recognized right away that it was my ex's handwriting. She knew what my signature looked like, but it was a loose imitation at best. I got in touch with a lawyer right away over the forged signature. But the homeowners association still demanded to go to court, and it took 7 months before that happened. Meanwhile, they were stacking unpaid fines against me weekly and threatening to put a lien on my house. We went to court, and the homeowners association's president looked very smug. But my lawyer pointed out how the signature wasn't the same as mine and was very inconsistent in the various forms. I'd never allowed the homeowners association's president into my house, and I'd never requested the forms. The idiot homeowners association's president actually slammed her palm on the table and said it was still binding, but when pressed where the fraudulent signature came from, she admitted my ex-wife called the homeowners associations, and they sent her the forms, then got them back in the mail signed. But then she actually claimed she thought I'd signed them. The judge looked at her and asked if she was serious. She confirmed she was. The judge then asked how a woman I was no longer married to, that had never even lived with me in my current residence, was supposed to have any bearing on whether or not I joined her homeowners associations. She went quiet, and I could see the "oh crap" look on her face as the hamster wheels were turning and she seemed to finally mentally put the pieces together. My lawyer then counterclaimed that what the homeowners associations did was blatant fraud and legal actions must be taken. And they were. I countersued the homeowners associations for the emotional distress of the harassment I'd received since moving in, which I had lots of proof of. That won me about 10 grand after lawyer fees that I decided to put towards my mortgage. The homeowners association's president was removed from her position. I like to think she was kicking and screaming. She was also slapped with a hefty fine. I've seen her outside a few times, and she always looks at me like I am the devil. The homeowners associations itself had to pay all of my legal fees too. I wanted to go after my ex for forging my signature, but I can't because not long after she forged my signature on those forms, she apparently left the country to be with her third affair partner. She's somewhere in Europe from what I can see of the final posts on her Facebook before she disappeared. So I can't do anything against her unless she ever returns to the US. So that was a wash. I'm not getting letters from the homeowners associations anymore though, and the new president has promised to keep things completely cordial from now on. I still don't feel like I got much of a win in this though. Other than the 10K payout, it all felt like a huge waste of time. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.